Welcome to the Frontline with FPM, where we talk about California politics, homeschool freedom, parental rights, and the family. I'm your host, Nathan Pierce, and thanks for joining us today. Let's jump right in and see what's going on here on the Frontline. Hey folks, we are going to be talking about several things today, and I'm excited about some of them more than others, but we'll jump right in. So the first thing I want to say is thanks, Drew, for putting in some work on just reviewing the RFMA, which we're going to get to be talking about in just a few moments. We also are going to be talking a little bit about Capitol Day, and I want to encourage you in that. We have a legislative kind of an update on where we're at with the legislative session coming up and a follow-up to our elections. But first, we're going to just go ahead and get started by talking about the RFMA, which has been in the news quite a bit lately. So, Drew, why don't you go ahead and explain to us what that is and why we should care about it?
All right. So the RFMA, it's an acronym for the Respect for Marriage Act. So it's a bill that it's a federal bill, so it just passed the United States Senate, and it's now going to the House, and it'll probably most likely be passed in the House and then be signed by the president into law. So essentially, what this bill does and why it's been in the news so much is it codifies same-sex marriage into law. So it basically makes the 2015 Supreme Court decision that legalized same-sex marriage across the nation, it basically makes it into a law instead of a court opinion. But it's been in the news for other reasons as well. One of the main things being that there's some major concerns about religious liberty coming from it. So the basics of the law is that it repeals the Defense of Marriage Act, which is a bill from many years back that basically defined marriage as a union of a man and a woman. So it repeals that and then redefines marriage as the union of two people, regardless of sex. And they said they included, sex, race, gender, ethnicity. So they added all, all different qualifiers to it now. So instead of man-woman relationship. One thing that it does do that a lot of people that supported it, including 12 Republicans in the Senate that voted for it, right. They said, there's strong protections for religious liberty. So the problem with that claim is that the protections for religious liberty really only go as far as explicitly religious organizations. So, for example, like a church, right? They have a stated mission, they have a stated, a statement of faith, and that includes, the belief that marriage is a union of a man and a woman, right? So they would have these protections in the case that they refuse to perform like a same-sex wedding or something like that, right? They wouldn't be in violation of this law, or an explicitly like religious nonprofit, right? However, that is really where the protections end. So the Respect for Marriage Act basically goes farther than the Obergefell decision, the 2015 Supreme Court decision that legalized same-sex marriage, in that it stops any religious protections outside of any explicitly religious settings. So I'm sure many people have heard of the story of Jack Phillips with his bakery. He was really brought in, hauled into court multiple times because he refused to make cakes for same-sex couples, like wedding cakes, right?
Right.
And he said, I'm fine with referring you to others. It's going against my religious conviction to make, a cake for a same-sex wedding. It basically, it feels to me as an endorsement of something that is against my faith. And so he was hauled into court multiple times. In the long run, I believe he won. I think there's still some ongoing litigation just because people kind of made him a target. So multiple people have kind of come in looking for trouble, looking for, any sort of way to pull him into court for any other reason, just to
cause more lawsuits. Yeah,
exactly. So he's been in court for years. The main impetus for this law was the overturning of Roe v. Wade, interestingly enough, because a lot of politicians on the Democrat side basically said, hey, they overturned, Roe v. Wade. They basically sent abortion back to the states as a legislative issue. They could do that to gay marriage because gay marriage was also legalized through a Supreme Court case. Now, 8 of the 9 Supreme Court justices, in their opinions on Roe v. Wade in this overturning over the summer, they said, no, we're not going to touch any more of those. But one justice, Clarence Thomas, did. He basically said, he didn't say, I want to overturn it. He basically said, since we determined that basically the justification for Roe v. Wade was so outlandish, it warrants looking back at these other cases that also, created rights that weren't explicit in the Constitution.
Right.
So,
right.
And that is where, a lot of Democrat politicians seized on it and said they're going to try and overturn gay marriage next, or even interracial marriage, which obviously both of those things are outlandish. And, Clarence Thomas does not speak for the whole court. But that was the main impetus for the bill. So it basically creates a system where if the Supreme Court were to overrule the Obergefell decision and send the decision of same-sex marriage back to the states, a state that does allow same-sex marriage could basically, certify a same-sex relationship for a couple that lives in a state that does not allow same-sex marriage.
So and then really, that state would have to recognize it.
Exactly. It's the same. It's very similar to the abortion landscape right now, right? There's states where abortion is illegal totally, or illegal after a certain, number of weeks. And then there's states where it's legal all the way up through birth. And so those people that want abortions in states where abortion is banned or limited, they are able to go to other states and get abortions. Right. So it's the same. It would be a similar system in that case. The religious liberty protections in this case, the concern was really peaked when there were multiple amendments that were brought up by some Republican legislators that said, hey, the religious liberty protections here are not sufficient. They don't protect individual conscience, right? They assume that religious people stop being religious as soon as they leave explicitly religious organizations. So it basically means, well, you're a Christian, you believe in, the biblical view of marriage. But when you're outside of church, you kind of have to, follow the cultural definition of it, which is not consistent with really any religious practice, any religious conviction. So there were multiple amendments proposed that would protect individuals, that would protect nonprofits from being targeted by the government, from, for rejecting or for embracing like a biblical view or, a traditional religious view of marriage. Yeah. And they were all voted down pretty much exactly along party lines. And so that is where a lot of the concerns come in, where I've read through these amendments. I've seen, the senators present them, and they all were very reasonable. They all said basically, listen, I'm not going to try and stop these people. I'm not going to try and stop this law. I just believe that we need some guarantees, right, for religious people. And they were all voted down. And so what that I think has kind of alarmed people too is the fact that there is a pressure for this to be almost, possibly weaponized in the future.
Yeah. Well, and what we're seeing here is a trajectory. We're looking at seeing how throwing out our foundation for truth, throwing out a biblical foundation for family and directly attacking the biblical family, the way God designed the family, throwing that out has switched from just saying all of these different definitions are okay, mm-hmm. and transitioning from that mindset that this is okay to saying, no, it's not just okay, it's everybody needs to embrace it. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's a little bit of religious freedom protection for certain entities, but
Yeah.
one of the questions I have is, um, who's going to define that religious entity, that religious organization, and where is that going to go? How long will the current definition last? And what's going to happen to people that don't fit into the definition of whoever's defining it in whatever given moment?
Mhm.
And then from there, where do we go from there? What's the next step here? Because this is, again, it's a trajectory. We've been moving in this direction as a culture, and as an overreaching government says, this is not just okay, but we're enforcing the fact that you have to embrace this,
Yeah.
this worldview of the family. And we're saying, the government is saying that you have to embrace it, and you can't make decisions, whether it's hiring or running your business, making business decisions based on any of these views that you may have. You have to basically squash your religious views,
Yeah.
and in the name of anti-discrimination. So it's kind of a scary thing to see that happening in our culture. But it's a continuation of a trajectory we've seen for many years, and
Yeah.
it's something that we need to be aware is not just happening, but it's going to keep happening. It's the line is further than I think a lot of people think.
Well, yeah, and one other point, kind of building on what you said about basically, where does this end? I know the slippery slope argument is, has been called a fallacy, and there's a lot of, ways to use it in as a that turns it into a fallacy. But really, you see the change from 10 years ago. I mean, Barack Obama became president, you know, as a staunch defender of traditional marriage, as he called it, right? And so that was 15 years ago, less than 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And so you see how much has changed. And there's actually a note in this legislation near the end where it says, by the way, this does not include polyamorous relationships, right? Polygamy, or more than two people.
Yeah.
And what I'm realizing as I read this bill is, why not?
Yeah. Yeah.
From this,
If you throw out some absolute truth,
exactly.
where do you found any of your arguments on
Yeah.
what is the reason? Like you said, yeah,
Yep.
why not?
Yeah, exactly. It's, the new definition is marriage is two people that love each other. Why is it two people?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's if it's vague enough, if you, like you said, going away from the foundation, it really does lead to, if you follow the argument, you know, polygamous relationships should not be prohibited by this legislation. If you
Yeah.
follow their argument to its logical conclusion, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that, and this legislation would have been unthinkable 10 years ago.
Right. Right.
But
Exactly.
so it's going to be very interesting to see this followed, I think.
Yeah.
Looking forward to the
So
next 10 years.
yeah, so taking a step back from the specifics of this thing, taking a step back and looking at what impact does this have on homeschooling groups, homeschool organizations, whether they're statewide or more local groups? Why do we care about this in terms of homeschooling? Now, one reason is that the pillars of homeschool freedoms are religious freedom and parental rights. Those are the two main pillars that uphold our freedom to homeschool, both in California and across the nation. And so this directly attacks religious freedom, but I would argue that it is moving in the direction of attacking parental rights as well, because of the way that it's shaping the culture, and it's moving closer and closer to telling parents what they can and can't teach, even inside their own home. Now, it's not specifically there yet, but this particular bill is getting closer by virtue of the fact that it is governing how a business or organization is allowed to make their own decisions, what views they are allowed to take into consideration when making their decisions. The second point is, so that's basically an attack on the pillars that uphold our homeschool freedoms. The second aspect is, how is this going to directly impact our policies of the groups that we function inside of here in California with regard to homeschool practices, homeschool organizations, support organizations, local support groups, private school satellite programs. How does this bill impact them? And I think there's a few different ways. But again, there's that line that we have to look at that we don't know exactly where it's going to fall, in terms of it is supposedly not going to impact strictly religious entities. What do you think about that? I mean, where does that fall? What, I mean, is in terms of what groups is it going to impact and which groups is it not going to impact, at least directly right now? I would think that probably the groups that are functioning within a church or as a ministry of a church are probably more safe than the other groups that are not part of a church. But if a group has no affiliation or no statement about being a religious institution, they have nothing to hold on to say this doesn't apply to us. Is that a fair explanation?
Yeah. Like I said, the protections really are for religious organizations. So, if you're like running, say running a small business, right? You may be a Christian yourself, right? Like very, very devoted, and yet your organization, your business, isn't explicitly religious. And so it falls outside of that scope of protection. And so, like in the case of like Jack Phillips,
Yeah,
I think there would be concerns about how far this bill would go into determining how you can run your business, and whether you can live by your religious convictions in that space.
yeah. So with regard to homeschool organizations, if it's a clearly non-religious group,
Mm-hmm.
you may not have an issue with this.
Yeah.
But if you do, you're going to run into issues, run into problems, into conflicts with this new law. If you are a religious group, but you don't have a clear statement about you being a religious group, this is going to be definitely a motivation to see what you can do to become a religious organization, if this is of a concern to you.
Yeah.
And then those groups that are attached to or semi-attached to a church, you may need to look more closely at what your attachment actually is to the church. Are you a ministry of that church? And we'll try to stay posted on trying to understand how this is actually going to play out in terms of the specifics of what the definitions are going to look like when the rubber meets the road on these particular on this bill, and how it would impact local support groups and PSPs. So
yeah, it'll be I think having it if you're looking for that sort of protection, I think an explicitly religiously based statement of ideals, beliefs, convictions, that sort of thing, I think that's going to be much more important.
Yeah. So definitely I definitely have some questions about this and how it's going to work out. I don't know when we'll have updates on that. Definitely plan on asking some attorneys about this one.
Yeah.
The next item I want to talk about is Capital Day, which is coming up in January, January 18th and 19th. And we at Capital Day is when we have groups of families show up at the Capitol. We do training, teaching you how to interact with legislators, how to present information on homeschooling. And it is a really important way for us to present the idea of homeschooling to every single legislator in the legislative bodies here in California at the state capitol here in Sacramento. They need to not just get homeschool information, which we have packets of information to provide to them with new statistics, which is very helpful and meaningful to them. But also we need them to see real live homeschool families, which is something that I by myself or Drew by himself can't really provide that unless we bring our families. So having you all bring your families can really have a huge impact. And it can be very educational too for everyone that comes. Whole families, kids of all ages are welcome to come. And that's coming up here in January 18th and 19th, when we will have we'll have training and visiting the Capitol building. And we are going through the process now to get people signed up for that. We have an application process so that we can vet people and make sure that that this is an event for private homeschool families to visit the Capitol. So we have an application process to make sure that's who is trying to come. And we have a limited number of spaces to make this event happen. So already we have about a little over half of our seats filled. So if you want to attend this event, I would encourage you to get signed up for it in the next week, or two at the latest.
That's the confirmed registrants, right? There's
right.
Applicants. So there's already a number of people still going through the vetting process. So those seats are going to fill up fast.
Yeah, that's right. So if you're interested in coming to Capitol Day, definitely get yourself going on this application. And if you have already applied but you haven't actually done your registration, please register right away so that you get that spot saved for you, because we are limited in our number of seats.
And it'll, to get to that application, it's pinned at the top of our website at fpmca.org. And so you'll see the big Capitol Day logo. You can scroll down; it's at the top of the posts as well. So you can find the links to the application and the registration there. So it's going to be my first Capitol Day in person, actually.
Right.
With the last 3 years or so being very much online, I've never done a Capitol Day at the Capitol. So been down there plenty of times, but never with a homeschool group. Yeah,
looking forward to being back there.
Yeah, it'll be good.
So that brings us to the legislative session, which is starting up next week.
Yes.
So after the election, we have our break from legislative activity, and this year is a little bit interesting because we have a couple of different things going on. One is the lag in the results from the election has been interesting to watch, but I think we pretty much know who's going to be showing up at the Capitol next week. But session starts on Monday, noon on Monday. We should have swearing in. So that's always interesting to watch. You can watch online at the legislative website, assembly.ca.gov or senate.ca.gov. There's a live stream you should be able to watch there to see the swearing in if you're interested in that, noon on Monday. But as we get into next week, also, what we're expecting to see is probably a few hundred bills introduced on Monday as well.
At least.
We're kind of watching that a little bit. We're expecting to see some gun legislation, as well as possibly some LGBT rights legislation, potentially from perhaps Senator Scott Wiener, I think.
He's been saying he's going to be working on that this legislative session. So he's not really providing any specifics, but that's been one of his more vocal campaigns.
Right. So we'll keep you posted on anything that develops there. Also on Monday, we're supposed to see a special session officially taking form on Monday, where the governor controls what's going to be discussed and debated with regard to legislation on Monday. Perhaps the focus is supposed to be on gas prices and oil companies, trying to get oil companies to lower their prices. So we'll see what actually happens there. I'm not sure really what to expect, but that's happening Monday. So Monday is when the brand new, newly elected legislators take office, as well as all the legislators that have been in office that are coming back are going to be resuming, and they'll all do their swearing in together. And one of the items that I wanted to mention about here is that one of the most recently called elections in California was the assembly seat for District 7, which one of the folks that's been a big help to homeschooling in the past several years has been Mr. Josh Hoover, who is now our newly elected assemblyman in Assembly District 7, which is just south of Sacramento, I should say east, southeast, south and east and
it's a weirdly shaped one.
Yeah, so it's over there, and so we're excited to welcome Josh Hoover to the floor, to swearing in, and that's really exciting. And there's a couple of reasons why, in addition to his help with homeschooling, Josh Hoover has been the chief of staff for for most recently, his position has been chief of staff to Assemblyman Kevin Kiley in the California State Legislature. Prior to that, he worked for other legislators, but Josh Hoover is also a homeschool graduate who has been involved in the homeschool community and has spoken several times at our Capitol Day. So he's definitely a friend, and we're excited to welcome him to the legislature. And as far as I know, he's the first homeschool graduate in modern times, I should say, to come to the California State Legislature. So that's exciting news, and I'm really glad to have him there, and we'll really enjoy having him as a new assembly member. And so yeah, it's nice to be able to share some great news like that in the midst of the rest of our work.
He's a solid guy, and he's going to be a great ally to have in the legislature.
Yeah, definitely a voice for freedom, a voice for families, a voice for families to be able to make decisions on education, for sure. So I'm grateful for that. Any other last thoughts, Drew, before we sign off for today?
Beyond just encouraging people to check out the website and look into Capitol Day, not really. Well, I do have one little note. I did want to say that we are going to be making this podcast a little more accessible through our website. So there's obviously, there's many platforms you can get it on. You can watch the video on YouTube. You can, get it on Spotify, Audible, Amazon Podcasts, Apple Podcasts will be up soon. But right now, actually, we have a kind of a new page on our main menu that'll take you to a page that'll have a summary. It'll have all of the episodes on it. And then also just straight from the homepage, there's a player where you can just play the latest episode. And so this one will be up, and as long as it's the latest episode that's up, it'll be on that main page that you can just play and listen to it. Or you can click on it and it'll go through Spotify. So Spotify, you can listen to podcasts for free. And so there's a lot of ways to find us. So,
yeah, excellent. Thanks.
Day.
Yeah, thanks for all your work on that, Drew,
Yeah.
making the technical end of this work. Um, yeah, sign up for Capital Day, and also just be aware that we really appreciate your support at FPM. We run on your donations from homeschool families in California, and we continue to appreciate and need continued support from each of you. So thank you for your help in that, and definitely subscribe and be getting our updates by email, because that's the number one way you can make sure you're getting the latest action alerts when it comes to time for legislation, which is happening next week. So if you
That'll be
want to
very
get
important starting next week for
yeah,
sure.
if you want to get updates on legislation, make sure that you get signed up for our emails on our website at fpmca.org. All right. Thanks so much, folks. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Frontline with FPM. For more information about the topics we discuss here, check out Family Protection Ministries at fpmca.org and subscribe to our channel.